A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Cam Edwards, your host. Glad that you're with us today here on another edition of Bearing Arms, Cam and Company. Coming up in just a couple of minutes, you're going to hear from the now former police chief in Lowell Township, Michigan, Chief Bukala, who was forced to resign after a Facebook post to from the Lowell Police Department talking about a couple of armed citizens, 4 of them, who were patrolling the streets of downtown Lowell days after riots and looting in nearby Grand Rapids, Michigan. This Facebook post from the Lowell Police Department, written by then Chief Bukala, talked about how, we're aware of this. Everything's fine. This is, legal to do. And the last line of that post, we support the Second Amendment and the armed citizen. Yeah, apparently you're not allowed to say that because the city manager there in Lowell ultimately told Chief Bukala, listen, you've really messed up here. And now I'm giving you a choice. You can either resign by 5 p.m. or you'll be fired at 5:01 p.m. So Chief Bukala did resign under pressure and under duress, but now he is speaking out, joined by his attorney, Catherine Henry. We'll get to that in just a moment. By the way, I never thought that this would be the most controversial T-shirt in my T-shirt collection. Yeah. Teddy Roosevelt. Who would have figured? Hey, guess what? The Trump campaign has a special offer just for you. President Trump wants to meet you. This is going to be the first opportunity that he's had to meet American patriots like yourself since our country started reopening. His team set to cover flight, hotel, give you VIP access for you and a guest. He'll even take a picture with you as well. All you have to do is text ENGAGE, ENGAGE, to 88022 today for your chance to meet President Trump. Again, that is ENGAGE, ENGAGE, to 88022 to enter to win this contest and to join President Trump in the fight to keep America great for 4 more years. Paid for by Donald J. Trump for President Incorporated. So before we get to our conversation with Chief Bukala, just a reminder about what's going on around the country here, because the news has been full of protests and tearing down of statues, but there's something that's taking place in many cities across the country right now. It's being reported locally, but the national media is paying absolutely no attention to it whatsoever. They're more interested in things like fireworks going off. Why are there fireworks going off? I don't know. Have you checked the date recently? Because, it's mid-June. There are a lot of fireworks stands that are open. So I'm guessing that people are buying fireworks and they're setting them off to make noise. That's my theory. Yeah. Meanwhile, while the police while the media just, clutching their hands and their pearls and wondering what's going on with all these fireworks. About headlines like this. What's going on in Chicago? 12 minors among 102 people shot, 14 fatally, as citywide gun violence spikes over Father's Day weekend. That's in Chicago. But we saw, and we have seen over this past weekend and over the past couple of weeks, spikes in shootings and violent crimes in cities across the country. At Bearing Arms later today, we're going to be talking about what's going on in New York City. But I had a piece over the weekend talking about what's going on in New York State, where, again, murders and shootings are up in New York City. They're up in Albany, New York. We had a shooting in Syracuse, New York, over the weekend as well. A large gathering of people, another shooting at a large gathering of people in Charlotte, North Carolina over the weekend. And again, while the media seems to be obsessed with, large gatherings like the Trump campaign and the rally that was held in Tulsa, Oklahoma over the weekend, media is saying very little about the large crowds at protests, and they're saying nothing at all about these large crowds that are gathering to congregate to party when violence breaks out. And a lot of these are gang-related shootings, and the media just simply does not want to talk about what is happening here, as they want to give oxygen and energy to the defund police, to the abolish police movement. They don't want to talk about a rise in violent crime, because if you talk about a rise in violent crime, 2 things happen. 1, people want police around, and 2, people want to own firearms to protect themselves. The media, by and large right now, doesn't want either of those things. What they do want, apparently, is for people to be silent and to not express support for things like the Second Amendment. Again, that seems to be what happened in Lowell, Michigan, where the chief, who was on the force, by the way, for nearly 25 years, saw his career end in an instant after expressing support for the Second Amendment rights of all Americans. Again, I had the opportunity to sit down and spend some time with Stephen Bukala and his attorney, Catherine Henry. Take a look and a listen to our conversation. Stephen and Catherine Henry, Stephen's attorney, thank you both for joining me on the program today. It's good talking with you.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. I've been following this story since really the local media there in Michigan started reporting on this. But for those who are kind of new to this story, can you explain what happened? There were, as I understand it, there were a small group of armed citizens who had contacted your office or had made statements that they were planning on legally carrying there in Lowell to protect businesses. And I guess it was your response that the city manager had a problem with, correct?
Yes. We were 2 days removed out of the riots in Grand Rapids, and these gentlemen had heard the rumors that there was going to be some rioters coming to Lowell, and they said it's not going to happen here. And they didn't have to contact the police department. They chose up because they were going to be carrying long guns and walking the streets. And so it was about 90% positive. The gentleman said that they had people stop, give them drinks, shake their hands, tell them thank you. But because they had a couple of vocal, I guess, people that didn't agree with it on sending email and text through Facebook, they had a negative view of it, and the mayor asked that I remove the last line of the Facebook post that said, "The Lowell Police Department supports the Second Amendment and the legally armed citizen." And that was the line that got me fired.
Now, when you say, because there's something that I'm kind of curious about, Stephen, the way that was phrased, the Lowell Police Department supports the Second Amendment and the armed citizen. Now, these were multiple citizens that were going out to Lowell. So it seemed to me like you were talking about the armed citizen in general, as
Correct.
Opposed to necessarily these four individuals. Again, not that you don't support that, but you were supporting the concept of the armed citizen. That's the way I took it.
Correct. And not only just the Second Amendment, but the entire Constitution.
Yeah. So you get this a pushback from folks on Facebook, and on social media, you're going to find people who will agree with everything and disagree with everything. You say the sky's blue, someone's going to come back and say the sky's green. What happened after that pushback started? Because ultimately you were you were pressured to resign, were you not? You were told if you don't resign, you're going to be fired?
Correct. I had until 5 o'clock that day, or otherwise 5:01, I was going to be terminated.
And so what made you decide to go ahead and resign rather than say, okay, go ahead and fire me then?
I was in the middle of a home refi, and I was supposed to go the very next day to get my mortgage complete for a 15-year as part of my retirement plan. They said they were going to keep it quiet if I resigned. The next thing I know is being leaked in the community that I had resigned because of this, and the media blows it up. I lose my home refi the next day. I couldn't get a hold of an attorney, and basically I resigned under duress, trying to keep it quiet.
And it's interesting, Stephen, because I've been trying to follow along on Facebook, and I have to say, when this story did break, when the news did leak out, you received a ton of support from members of the community there in Lowell.
Still am receiving a ton of support. There's a few detractors that are very vocal, and I guess you could say militant on their dissent on the Second Amendment and the Constitution, and they're the ones that are making the most noise.
But Catherine, if you don't mind, I want to ask you a question here. There's been a city council meeting. There have been local business owners and residents who have spoken up in support of Stephen. How did you decide to get involved in this case?
I've actually worked with some matters in the city of Lowell about 5 years ago or so, and that's where Steve and I originally met, was in my capacity as special counsel for the city of Lowell roughly 5 years ago. And so when I'm in the midst of actually working on a statewide constitutional amendment petition right now, so a little overwhelming time-wise, and so kind of out of the blue, I get a call from Steve and talking about this, and I said, you know what, I actually wasn't taking any cases right now, but this coincides exactly with what we're trying to do to restore freedom in our state constitution. So that's how I came to be involved. It's the right place at the right time to try to fight all these issues and restore the Constitution to the way it should be, whether it's in his case or whether it's through this constitutional amendment or a variety of other things. So.
And Stephen, what would you like to see happen as a result of this? I mean, again, you say that you resigned under duress. Do you want your job back?
At this point, no, because the city manager didn't make this decision in a vacuum. He had, I guess you could say, the city council gave him the blessing. At least 3 of them did. So there's going to be a lack of trust there. I don't think I could come back under those circumstances. But what I would like is, I was 5 months from having my 25-year pension, and I'd like to be either paid out or they can buy that time, and that way I'm made whole so that at 55 I can draw my pension.
And a couple of things, too, that I think, just because Steve has had to answer that same kind of question so many times, I'm not sure, I'm sure he thinks that he's saying all of these things, but a couple of key points is when he's talking about the 3 city council members that must have gone along with this manager's action, it's important to note that his main concern is that in working in a community where the elected officials don't respect the Constitution, that's how it's not going to be a very comforting environment for him to go back to. So it's not so much a personal issue. He's not just taking personal offense to the choices that they made. He's realizing that his oath that he swore was to uphold the U.S. and Michigan constitutions, and so having to work at a place where he's going to get fired or punished in any way for supporting those constitutions, that's kind of where the main problem lies at this point. And so in conjunction with that, it's a very minimal amount of essentially compensation that he's asking for in terms of going forward financially, but he would like them to have to issue an official statement that basically explains very succinctly that Steve didn't do anything wrong by enforcing and protecting the constitutional rights of others, and that he could be assured that going forward, the city of Lowell is going to officially recognize their duty to uphold the U.S. and Michigan constitutions, and that nobody else is going to be punished for doing so while they're working with the city of Lowell. So those are just some of the key things, in addition to the other things that he mentioned a moment ago.
I mean, it is amazing that, the statement, "We support the Second Amendment and the armed citizen," was seen as so controversial that you would be told, okay, resign or be fired. I would think it would be the opposite. I would think that if you had written that we don't support the Second Amendment, we don't support armed citizens, or we don't support the First Amendment, or you don't have a Fourth Amendment right, that I could see being controversial. That I could see the city manager coming in and saying, listen, Steve, we've got a problem. But what does this say about, Steve, I'm curious. I mean, what is your reaction to the fact that speaking up in support of the constitutional rights of residents is now apparently considered a fireable offense in Lowell, Michigan?
Well, it's not only that; it's considered racial, white supremacist. Let's see what else: racist, sexist, bigoted, homophobe. Personal feelings were inserted. There was no personal feelings inserted. It was a statement of fact. We support the Constitution, and whether you agree with it or not, we've had people open carrying in town for years, and nothing like this has ever happened. All I was doing was informing the public that there was going to be 4 armed individuals walking the streets, exercising their Second Amendment rights.
And if these had been 4 black guys instead of 4 white guys, would you have felt the same way?
Would have felt the same way because they're exercising their Second Amendment rights. We had a march this weekend that had all races with us walking the streets of Lowell, all armed, and there was no issues whatsoever.
And that's the way it should be. We had a march in Oklahoma City this past weekend of about 200 armed black gun owners. I'm adamant. I know you feel the same way, Steve. The Second Amendment is a right of the people, all of the people, and self-defense is a human right. I confess I don't get where the allegations of racism or homophobia or all of the other insults that were lobbied against you. I don't get where that's coming from, other than people who are trying to tar your reputation and to try to make your statement more controversial when it wasn't in the first place.
I think where they were getting that from is one of the detractors on the Facebook post. One of the gunmen that were walking the town identified himself, and then they went on his personal page and they went back months and months and months, and he had a picture of a Confederate flag on the back of his truck. Now, what this person did is they cropped this photo down to just show a picture of the Confederate flag. But what it really was is there was 4 of them. They were waving the American flag, and they were standing around the person with his back holding the Confederate flag, and the Confederate flag was all ripped up. So it almost looked like, in my opinion, they were supporting that we're one nation with the United States and the American flag, and that the Confederate flag was torn and defeated. So I don't know, that was just my interpretation of the photo, but when someone took it and cropped it down, they said, this is what you're supporting racism. So then they hijacked the message after that.
Unbelievable. So what happens next? Obviously, again, you're trying to get some sort of recourse from the city council, but is this still a big issue in Lowell? I know you said that there was a march this past weekend. Are people still coming up to you and saying, Stephen, this is ridiculous, what happened to you?
Everywhere I go, the people are saying, we've never seen anything like this. We can't believe this is happening. How can they not support the Constitution? I have a GoFundMe page that we raised over $10,000 in 1 week. But, it could take more than that. So our GoFundMe is still going. If anybody wants to contribute to that, support Chief Steve Bukala on GoFundMe.
Excellent. I appreciate that.
We will, we're trying to give them an opportunity to do the right thing. So they've received the written requests about what it is that we'd be seeking. And they definitely have all my contact information. They know how to reach us. So we understand, though, that there's a holiday, there's 4th of July, and, some summer vacations and different things that come up. So with the next meeting, or maybe 2, we will have to move forward with, I guess, more aggressive action as necessary. But we're hoping that in between now and then, they're going to do the right thing and respond in some way to the basic requests that we were making. And if they don't, or if they respond negatively, those requests are definitely going to have to increase, because the target for him to just be able to move on and be able to support the U.S. and Michigan constitutions, the more they're going to have to essentially pay out for that situation. We need to send the message. It's not okay to call support of the Constitution personal feelings or political debate, especially when in Michigan, our state constitution requires that all public officials and police officers swear an oath to uphold the U.S. and Michigan constitutions. So we're trying to be reasonable, but we might have to take it some steps further.
Well, listen, I appreciate both of you joining me today. Stephen, last question for you. What is your advice to other departments who might find themselves in a similar situation? Would you advise them keep quiet about the Constitution, or do you think it's important that agencies stand up and say, listen, we support the First Amendment right to protest. We support the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. Is now a time to speak up, or else we watch these rights disappear?
You have to speak up. One of my predecessors told me, he said, pick a hill that you're willing to die on for your career. And this was my hill that I was going to die on. Not only do you have an obligation, but it's your duty to disobey an illegal order. And going against the Constitution would be an illegal order. And I don't stand for that. I have to stand with my principles and my core beliefs that the Constitution is the law of the land.
Well, again, Stephen, I wish you the very best. I appreciate you standing up and speaking out, and I am so sorry that it has come with these type of repercussions. But I hope that we can talk again in the future. And thank you both for joining me today here on Bearing Arms Cam & Company. Well, I certainly appreciate Stephen Bukala and Attorney Catherine Henry for joining me on the program. If there are any more updates out of Lowell, Michigan, we will certainly bring them to you. Now, before we get to our armed citizen story of the day, our good deed of the day, our recidivist report, just a reminder once again that the Trump campaign has a special offer just for you. President Trump wants to meet you. It'll be the first opportunity that he has had to meet American patriots like yourself since our country started reopening. Team's going to cover the flight, hotel, and give you VIP access for you and a guest. President Trump will even take a picture with you as well. All you have to do is text ENGAGE to 88022 today for your chance to meet President Trump. Again, that's ENGAGE, ENGAGE to 88022 to enter to win this contest and to join President Trump in the fight to keep America great for 4 more years. Paid for by Donald J. Trump for President Incorporated. All right, let's get to today's armed citizen story, our good deed of the day, and our recidivist report. We'll start with our recidivist report out of Davenport, Iowa. You may remember this story. A 22-year-old woman shot and killed at a protest in Davenport. And when her sister learned the news, she went online. She was so raw and so visceral in her grief and anger about what happened to her sister. And she was certain that this was not police violence, that this was somebody in that crowd of protesters who shot and killed her sister. And as it turns out, yes, she was right. An arrest has been made in the death of Italia Kelly, that woman killed in Davenport, Iowa. The Quad City Times reporting that the suspect who was arrested, a 21-year-old man, well known, by the way, to law enforcement, 21-year-old Parker Marlon Bells, is now being charged with 1 count of first-degree murder. But going back to 2016, Bells had repeated run-ins with the law and no consequences for any of those crimes. Back in 2016, he pled guilty to a charge of engaging in a riot when he got into a fight with several individuals on a city street. It's an aggravated misdemeanor charge. He was sentenced to 6 months of probation. Also in 2016, Bells pleaded guilty to an aggravated misdemeanor charge of assaulting a police officer. That too, an aggravated misdemeanor, and that too resulted in a 6-month probationary sentence. Yeah. And in 2016, wait, we're not done yet. Also in 2016, he pleaded guilty to a charge of third-degree criminal mischief and was sentenced to 1 year of probation. So 3 crimes, 3 guilty pleas, not a day in jail for any of them. And now Bells is facing first-degree murder charges. He is going to be spending some time in jail awaiting trial, and he could be facing life in prison if he is convicted of this crime. Our armed citizen story today from Shreveport, Louisiana, where an early morning robbery on Father's Day turned into a shooting. 1 suspect still on the run, 1 held by an armed citizen until police arrived. This happened about 6:15 Sunday morning. Guys in his garage working. All of a sudden, 2 armed men come in and demand money from him. He yells out, "I don't have anything to give you." And inside the home, his sister hears what's going on. She grabs a handgun. She runs outside. Shots are fired. One of these suspects shoots her brother in the chest. She shoots one of the suspects in the leg. Second suspect takes off running, gets in a car, and drives away. Meanwhile, she holds that wounded suspect until police arrive. The good news is, looks like her brother did not suffer life-threatening injuries, according to police. The bad news is, again, there is that second suspect that's on the loose. Shreveport police are looking out. But the woman who defended her brother and herself from those armed robbers, thankfully not facing any charges at all because she was acting in self-defense. And finally today, our good deed of the day from Houston, Texas. Take a look at this scene. This was Friday night about 11 p.m. Rollover accident there in Houston, multiple people inside that Jeep, and it was an off-duty Houston police officer who was the first on scene. We don't know who this officer was yet. They haven't released any details about, the officer. But what we do know is that when that officer arrived there, he saw the driver of that Jeep suffering from a severe arm injury. He was able to apply a tourniquet to her arm, preventing the loss of blood and quite possibly saving her life. She was life flighted to a local hospital there in Houston. At last report, remains in critical condition. Another passenger in that car was also taken to a hospital. No word on their condition. There were two others that were in a separate vehicle that were involved in this accident that were uninjured, thankfully. And again, we hopefully will know more about that officer off duty, but in the right place at the right time and willing and able to do the right thing. Because we certainly do thank him for his good deed, and it would be lovely to be able to put a name with that good deed. That is going to do it for this edition of Bearing Arms Cam & Company. I want to thank you for being a part of the program today. Coming up tomorrow on the program, our friend Kurt Schlichter joins us from townhall.com. We're going to be talking about the unrest and the statues coming down and the attempts to rile up the right, Kurt says. He says, keep your eyes on the prize. We'll talk about that and more on the next edition of Bearing Arms Cam & Company. But in the meantime, don't forget you can subscribe to Town Hall Media on YouTube or the Bearing Arms Cam & Company podcast at Apple. That way you never miss one of the programs. Hope you have a fantastic Monday, and we will see you soon. Until then, be safe, be well, be free. We'll talk to you soon with another edition of Bearing Arms Cam & Company tomorrow.